You know, I actually did redesign the 300ZX a while ago. It has to be 3 years or something like that. It was a long time ago, so I think it's due for a refresh, and that's what we're gonna do in this video. We're gonna take the Z32 and redesign it into something cool that could potentially be built today. First of all, let's have a look at the generations and the genesis of the Nissan Z, or in this case, the Datsun Z right here. This has to be one of the most beautiful side views ever made in a car, at least in my opinion. I think these are timeless proportions, specifically for a typical two-door front engine rear wheel drive proportions. This is what you want. It's almost at the same level as the 250 GTO for about 1,000,000 times less money. So it's a beautiful design in my opinion. I love the roofline that, as you know, goes down all the way, never comes back up except for this added spoiler that we have right here, which kind of looks pretty cool. But I prefer it without that and have a clean cut for the rear end design. Before we continue with the redesign, I'd like to take a minute to thank today's sponsor, Skillshare. I want to encourage you to take some time to explore new skills, deepen existing passions, and get lost in creativity, and that's exactly what you can do on Skillshare. If you're unfamiliar with Skillshare, it's an online learning community with thousands of classes in a wide range of topics. You find the classes that interest you, from drawing and sketching to business and strategy classes that will help you grow professionally. And most classes are straight to the point, and you can watch them at your own pace to fit your daily routine. I've been on the platform for a number of years now, both as a teacher and a student. I'm a fan of Aaron Draplin's design classes on Skillshare, and specifically his new class, Dirty Design with Draplin, Crusty Techniques to create truly original work. I've always wanted to improve my graphic design skills. So I do know industrial design, but not graphic design, and his classes give me new angles on how I can work on my thumbnails and also create my business logo. Skillshare expands constantly with new premium classes every week, and the entire catalog is now available with subtitles in Spanish, French, Portuguese, and German. However, here's the coolest part. Since Skillshare is sponsoring this video, they like to offer you, my subscribers, 1 month of free premium membership. However, you have to act fast, because only the first 1,000 people to use the link or my code will get 1 month free trial on Skillshare. So go ahead and click the link in the description or use my code on the website Skillshare.com to get your 1 month of free trial. You can see the generations here and kind of when they were built. This is of course the 60s, and then we get into the 70s and maybe the 80s, late 80s. I'm not really sure when the 280 Z was in production, the exact years, but you can see that it gets a lot more edgy in this design. We have, for example, this little edge right here, and we have some other edges in the greenhouse. This looks more straight, and then it has a corner here before it goes down. So this is not as beautiful as the 240Z in my opinion, and the reason is it just doesn't have the same flow and the same organic soft surfacing that we have in the 240Z. It's still a beautiful car, but you can see that we now have an integrated bumper here as well that we don't have on the 240. You can actually remove this chrome bumper up here and some added trim pieces in the middle, and also added trim pieces and bumpers in the rear end. And then we go into the 300ZX, and this is the Z31 right here, the first edition of the 300ZX. Looks very similar actually, now that I look at it, to the 280Z. There's not a lot of differences here. We have a clear separation between the greenhouse and the rear window here that we don't really have here, not in the same way. But other than that, the proportions looks very similar to the 280Z, because we have a straight line here before it dips down in a corner into the rear end. But we do have, as you can see, if we zoom in here, it doesn't cut all the way down. We have this little triangle here. Even though it is a little tiny piece of bodywork, it's still changes the feel from the 240, which doesn't have that triangle here in the back sticking out after the edge is actually cut off. And the same goes for the 280Z. It also has a cut in the rear end. Now, this is the main star of today's video, the 300ZX Z32. This is a super cool car. This was one of my dream cars when I grew up. I thought it would look so cool. You have the Diablo headlights, and you have a very smooth body, and the proportions really changed here from the previous generation. These, as you can see, you have more of a sports car, I would say maybe Americanized style. Gone is this typical Z line that stretches all the way down and cuts off. Now we have a clearly defined boot or trunk here, and also some very integrated, very plastic looking, a little bit melted cheese in this area for this type of generation. This is the melted cheese era of car design. But other than that, it looks very smooth, and I do love that they brought back the simple surfacing from the Z31 with removing all these trim pieces that we have in the middle of the car, for example, and just have a clear surface all over this car. But as I said, the greenhouse changed a lot. Look at this pillar here. This is something we've never seen in Z cars before, or I don't think we've seen it after either. So this has very unique proportions for a Z car. It's going to be very interesting to redesign this. I think I'm going to make it go back to the original roofline and cut this off in the redesign later in this video. So now let's go into the 350Z. This to me is a fantastic design when it comes to graphic design, and the reason being, you have very cool line flow between the graphics. We have this shoulder line cutting into the taillight here, and if we follow the greenhouse now intersects into the taillight and creates the taillight itself by intersecting these two lines. I think that little detail is such a cool design feature graphically for the 350Z, and it has an overall evolution of the 300ZX. It still has this defined boot in the rear, as you can see, which looks pretty cool on the 350Z. I definitely prefer this greenhouse framing over the 300ZX more curved framing, as you can see right here. This looks a lot better and just cleaner in my opinion. We also have a clear high point where the greenhouse sits before it comes down and creates this Z line that we've been talking about. And then we have the 370Z, clearly evolution from the 350Z. I don't think this looks anywhere near as good as the 350Z. It has a lot cleaner lines in the 350 than we have in the 370. At least that's what I think. And we have an upswing here in the greenhouse, which I kind of like. I also like that the corner here became more defined than it was in the 350. But what ruins it a little bit for me is the curvatures all over and volume, specifically in the rear. It looks too swollen in the rear end, in my opinion. I think this taillight is really cool. It has like a boomerang shape that also comes back in the front end, as you can see right here. So we have a connection between the front end graphics and the rear end graphics, and we have a nice line cutting in the bottom to create a nice base for this design. But graphically, I don't think it is as cool as the 350Z with these intersecting lines right here. Last but not least, we have the brand new Nissan Z. This is my favorite Z since the 240Z. I think this looks absolutely fantastic. It's based on the 370Z at the same platform, but we have graphic features connecting all the generations. For example, as you know, the 300ZX taillights, we have the 240 proportions with this line is now back in full swing with the cutoff in the back and not any upswing in the rear end. And the bumpers, everything just looks really cool. We have this black graphics that makes it look lighter. It makes it look like this piece is disappearing and that we don't have anything there, and it makes it look a whole lot lighter in the rear end. We also have this line, which is very interesting and unique, and a shoulder line that goes up and then kind of fades into the hood right here. I made a video on this in person where I talked about this specific line on the Bambly channel, so you can go and check that out when I walk around this car and talk about all the little design features that I love about it. We also have this line at the bottom right here going up at the same angle as the top line, very cool. and that is then balanced out by this graphic feature at the bottom that goes in the opposite direction, creating this narrow waist and big hips and creating a very muscular rear end of the Z car. So with that said, let's jump in and continue in Photoshop and focus on what we're the star of today's video, the 300ZX Z32, and let's see if we can modernize it into something that could be built today. I'm going to take inspiration from the 240Z. I'm also going to take some inspiration from the new Nissan Z, combine it into the 300ZX, and let's see how that is actually going to turn out. I think the first redesign I did of the 300ZX was a long time ago, as I said, I think 3 years ago. I think my style has evolved a lot since then. That, to me, if I remember correctly, it looked a little overstyled to me. And I'm gonna keep it very simple, because if we go back through the generations, all the way back to the base of the Z, the Datsun 240Z, it has a very simple treatment of both the lines and the proportions and the graphic features of the car. So I'm gonna take some wheels from, for example, the what's it called, the Untitled design, the GTR concept. It's now a production car. But I love those wheels, and I think it's gonna suit this car. I'm gonna take some bits and pieces from the GTR in the lower part of this car, and also take some pieces from the new Porsche GT3 Touring, or the GT3. The front end, I think, is a simple intake that will suit a modernization of the 300ZX. I just love the intake of the new Porsche GT3, and I think it will suit this design in its simplicity. And around that front end, I want to create some more intakes that are actually functional and not add a bunch of fake vents onto the Z, because the Z has always been a very functional car and design. Even the new one, compare the new Z to, for example, the Toyota Supra, they have two completely different philosophies in styling. They're both Japanese, but Nissan kept the front intake to be very square and very simple and very functional at the same time, while Toyota has all kinds of lines and wings going on in the front end, and maybe 30% of the intakes in the front are actually functional. So two very different philosophies, and we got to keep that in mind when we redesign the 300ZX here, to stick with the Nissan philosophy of simplicity and functionality. And for the headlights here, I actually took some headlights from the new Nissan Frontier and kind of remolded them into fitting, I guess, pretty good on the front end of the Nissan 300ZX, because if you look at the Z32, I think the headlights are one of these key features or graphic details that sets the Z32 apart. They are from, you know, they share their headlights with the Lamborghini Diablo, and they sit very narrow in the front end, and it makes for a very distinct face of the 300ZX, a distinct face that if you're going to modernize it and if you want to keep the same feeling when you look at the modernization, it needs to come back as a 300ZX immediately and not have any hesitation about what this is. I'm also adding a bit of a power bulge on the hood from the 240Z. It has one of those back in the day, and the new Z also has it, so why not put it in here? I think it could suit this car, have a little bit of styling in the surfacing of the car. Now moving on to the rear end. This is where it gets interesting here, because I removed the not sedan looking style, but the trunk of the car. I want to remove that completely and have that classic Nissan Z roofline that dips down and just gets cut off like as if it was cut off with a sword in the rear end. And that's the design that I want to keep here in this redesign, and clean everything up and make it look modern. Not add, instead, I think the key point here is taking away things and features from the design to make it look modern, because I think that's the direction Nissan is actually headed in, and I think that's a modernization of the 300ZX would also head in. And that's it for the redesign of the 300ZX. I really like how this turned out. Thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to click the link down in the description and start learning today. And thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.